good thing is we are now live on YouTube. So thank you for my YouTube viewers. And then thank you for everyone that came in here on Zoom. So real quick, my name is Corey Lebrecht. I am the manager of employee and community development here at Nutmeg State Financial Credit Union. And I am joined by the one and only AVP of Lending, Shane Dugan. For those that have come into some of our webinars before, we've talked about various items, more specifically the PPP we focused on, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So if you guys saw our email or social media post or however you found this, we actually asked you guys for questions this time, and that would be a lot of the content of the meeting. We will keep those questions and we'll go to them to the end. I have about 5 or 6 that came in. And then we will also leave the chat functionality open for everyone. We're going to leave everyone muted, by the way. I think I said that once, but everyone's going to stay muted except for Shane and I. Sorry, guys. Just a little bit easier and it flows better to respect everyone's time. So we're going to be utilizing the chat functionality in Zoom to ask questions. So I will test that out to everyone, and I just said hello. So we will get to your questions till at the end. We're not going to stop for questions. Shane may actually stop here and there to do so, but just a heads up on that. So what we'll do, Shane, is I'm going to turn it over to you. You'll start going. And as you guys have questions, please type them into the chat. I just sent you guys a hello. If you needed it, we'll put some links in there for you as well. Another thing, I know it's 3 o'clock on a Thursday. It feels like Friday, right? If you guys need to log out early or you missed something or you want us to go back to something, that's fine. We're actually going to be releasing this video about an hour after we're done here on all of our social media platforms, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So if you missed something or you want to show this or rewatch it or didn't want to just see our friendly faces again, it'll be available on our social media platforms directly after this meeting. So give it about an hour. So other than that, I will shut up now and I will give the floor to Shane, who has shared his entire desktop with us. So let's, there it is.
All right, hopefully you can only see the PowerPoint presentation instead of everything at this point. Corey, can you confirm that for me?
Now I can confirm that.
All right, cool. So guys, it'll be a little bit different than what we went through the first 3 presentations that we did. Those were very kind of information heavy. The point of today is more to focus on a lot of those updates that actually took place when we had the last presentation. So if you guys all jog your memories back to early this month, basically the day that we had the PPP webinar, the last one that was centered on the forgiveness part at that time, they actually changed a bunch of the rules that day. So, I did my best to try to add what those changes are from a high level standpoint to that. I've actually gone through and as we get through the presentation towards the end, there'll be some links that you could use, and we'll get this presentation out to the group as well. So you can access those links through it. But what we've done is we've updated that presentation that I did on 6.5 with the more current information. So the recording itself is not updated, right? But the presentation itself is. So that PowerPoint will be now up to date. And today we're going to cover what a lot of those changes are, and then some other just general changes to what's gone on with the SBA and then the overall forgiveness process. We're not going to talk a lot today about actually submitting the forgiveness application itself. Just so you know, there are still components of that the SBA is working on releasing. So we are still waiting guidance on that. I'd anticipate us being ready to submit, or have you all submit the forgiveness part, likely towards the end of July, possibly early August, depending upon when they release that final information. So there'll be more formal communications at that point once we have that all rolled out. But for today, we're going to go through those high-level updates, and then again, we'll get into that Q&A session and let you guys add any other questions that we haven't covered. So we'll get started. Get to the first screen. And I don't know how I did this last time where I was only looking at one screen, but somehow I have them on 2 different screens. So I apologize for not staring at the screen today, but I'm using a different one. So quick reminder, one of the things that I'm going to kind of, and this is the first and third bullet point, is one of the things I've picked up through PPP is that having some patience through this process actually is going to probably yield you a better result in the end. And I'm going to give you an example of people who applied early on, who were either self-employed or partnerships, who weren't sure whether or not they could include their individual earnings as a part of the PPP proceeds. If you had waited a couple weeks later, they actually rolled out additional guidance that allowed you to bring in your owner compensation as a part of your payroll at that point. Now, unfortunately, the way that they rolled that out, time frame has lapsed and you really can't do that anymore. But my point to this is sometimes not going gung-ho and trying to submit the forgiveness application right now, in its first round might actually be better for you, in that the SBA continues to make changes to the program. They continue to make changes not only to the actual application process. So if, a lot of you on this call probably already have a PPP loan, but just so you're aware, they have extended the deadline out to August 8th, I believe it is. So you can still apply for PPP loans, right? So that was a recent change that happened literally at the last minute. And a lot of this stuff continues to happen, right? So the SBA gets some sort of pain point that you guys are feeling, whether or not it's on the origination side or now more kind of focused on the forgiveness side. And then they try to adjust that through changes in legislation and the law around it. One of the big sticking points for people that we'll cover today is if you ended up receiving an EIDL advance loan, that might potentially make or impact your forgiveness. Now, there's also talk about the SBA just doing a blanket forgiveness on loans on a certain threshold as well. I've heard $150,000 and less, and then they'll just kind of wipe those out. That has not happened, so that is not law or anything like that. But my point being, don't rush to fill out the forgiveness application right now, in my opinion, because it's likely going to change on you. You're going to have to go fill it back out again anyway. The important thing is that you know where to get the information from. You know how to collect the payroll information that it's looking for. You know how to understand the full-time equivalent calculation. Those are the things that are important to focus on right now, not necessarily filling out the formal forgiveness application. Because again, if you did that the week that it came out, it changed a week later anyway, and then you're going to have to refill out that new version of it. So just be patient. Good things apparently come to those who wait. Sometimes PPP is a good example of that, I guess, for some of you folks. Okay, so just kind of a housekeeping item there. Again, be careful with what you're reviewing online and on websites. There's still a lot of bad information and old information out of there. A lot of posts, if you pull that up, you might notice that the information is from April, right? So it's not going to have any guidance that came out after that. So just be careful of that. Make sure that you're looking directly through the SBA's website if you need information, or reach out to us for the most up-to-date information. If we don't know it, we'll obviously research it and get back to you at that point as well. But just be very careful about what you do and what you're looking at. Make sure that you look at the dates that are on any sort of articles, posts, that type of stuff, as you do your own research, okay? As I mentioned, the next PPP webinar, we will host that likely the last week of July. That's probably what my thought is at this point, but we'll keep you up to date in communication on that as well. And again, that will be really centered on the actual process of submitting the PPP forgiveness part. We'll likely have a portal that you'll submit it to, similar to what you did on the origination side. Hopefully, like many people experienced across the channel, right? A lot of those issues where everybody was trying to access a site all at once won't, be the case in this aspect. But more to come out on that as we roll out later on this month. One of the large housekeeping items on the bottom here that I wanted to cover, and this is a big one for people I think that many of us weren't expecting, and maybe that the SBA didn't communicate out in the greatest possible manner. There are multiple loan programs out there with the SBA, right? So there's the Paycheck Protection Program, which is much of what we centered around because we're the lender, we're the conduit for that program, right? You're going to the lender, us in this case, and you're requesting financing for the PPP program directly through us. There's also that EIDL, right? The Economic Injury and Disaster loan through the SBA. You would apply directly through the SBA. I'll cover that program and what that is exactly towards the end of the presentation as well. But in regards to PPP and how this pertains to you guys, if you submitted a EIDL loan request and you ended up getting a part of that as the advance, that EIDL advance, or what many people are calling the EIDL grant, it's not really a grant, but that's what a lot of people are referring to it as. If you received those funds, just know that the SBA, as of today, is saying that that's going to be reduced. That's going to reduce your forgiveness, that amount. So that's that part where you could have requested up to $10,000 in advance. And the way that they're saying basically that is that it was an advance of either your PPP loan or the EIDL loan if you ended up getting a larger loan in the end. So what they're saying is that if you also then got a PPP loan on top of that, you've kind of gotten more money than you should have. So what they're going to do is if you've gotten up to that $10,000, they're just going to reduce your forgiveness by whatever you received for that EIDL advance or the EIDL grant, as like I said, many people are calling it. Okay. That was that loan, just so you know, that everybody was sitting there waiting and didn't hear anything about up to $10,000. What they ended up doing midway through, I think it was May when it started hitting people's accounts, is they changed it to $1,000 per employee up to 10 employees, up to $10,000. So it wasn't just straight $10,000 at that point. Some people who applied early on and got it did get a full $10,000, even though they didn't have 10 employees. But what they did is they changed it to that formula after. So just so you're aware, if you did end up getting one of those loans as of today, your loan forgiveness would be reduced by whatever you received for that EIDL grant. Okay. Now, I think that is a surprise to a lot of people. And I'm assuming that is probably being escalated to Congress and being discussed. I don't know whether that will make a change to it or not, but my thought is, like many of the things that have become pain points or causes for concerns for people, the SBA has addressed.
Hey, Shane, you cut out for a second, at least on my end. Just a heads up. Let me unmute you, Shane. Shane, you're still muted. Oop. Try it again.
There we go.
There it is.
So I just explained to Corey that my internet has been the part of me getting dropped, but now my cell phone drops on me. So it's sad. All right. So we'll segue from there. I don't think I lost too much for you guys. So basically, kind of the moral of that story is if you ended up getting that EIDL advance loan, just know as of today that will affect your forgiveness in an aggregate amount for what you ended up with that loan. Okay. All right, so we'll get into the specific changes now that took place on 6/5. All right, so the largest change and the change that I think I get the most questions about is the usage for payroll. So the first iteration of PPP, Corey, you can still see my screen, right? That didn't change? Yeah, okay.
Yep, you're good, Shane.
Thanks. That changed from 75%, right? You needed to use at least 75% of the loan proceeds for payroll to now 60%, okay? So no longer do you have to use 75%, you can reduce that down to 60% and still have that other 40% left over to use on those other qualifying expenses, right? And other qualifying expenses are those things that were in place prior to 2/15/2020, which are rent, interest on your mortgage, and utilities, right? So utilities being water, electric, gas, that type of stuff for your business as well. Okay, so you have up to 40% of the funds now, instead of that 25, that could also be used for those other qualifying expenses. Now that doesn't mean you have to use it for those, right? You could use all 100% for payroll, that's still fine. It just gives you more wiggle room. Now, one thing that did not change though, and I was a little surprised on this, so I have to correct myself from the last webinar that we did, is that didn't change your threshold for needing to keep people's salaries at least 75% of what they earned prior to this. If you reduce people's salaries by more than 25%, that will continue to factor into your forgiveness reduction, okay? So just be aware of that. Now, you don't have to use all, again, 75% for payroll, but for those employees that don't fall into the safe harbor exemption, we'll cover in a minute as well, you still want to make sure that you maintain their salaries at least a 75% basis to what it was prior to this, okay? So those are kind of the main usage changes for what you need to use the funds for. Your period, your covered period has been extended as well, okay? So there was a lot of talk initially, and a lot of the funds that you received were off of that 8-week period, right? We talked a lot about 8 weeks because that was kind of how much money you ended up getting. It looked into an 8-week period. And then also on the forgiveness side, they've extended that out to 24 weeks now. And it's not that you have to wait 24 weeks, it's that you have up to 24 weeks to now use the funds, okay? You can opt to keep the 8-week period, that's totally fine. If you spent it in that capacity, you can continue to go forward with forgiveness as if you are doing it on an 8-week period, and that's perfectly fine. However, if you haven't been able to exhaust all of your money during that 8-week period, you now have out to 24 weeks to use the proceeds of your loan and still get full forgiveness so long as you follow the other components of the program, okay? And again, you do not have to wait for that 24 weeks to lapse. You can get 15 weeks into it, you hit your 100%, nothing wrong with applying for it at that point, as long as you can, again, substantiate that, okay? Other deadline extensions, the previous extent, if you let people go or you reduce your staff levels or compensation prior to 6/30, the previous deadline was 6/30, that has actually been rolled back out to December 31st, 2020. So instead of having to bring people back by 6/30/2020, you now have until the end of the year to bring those people back and still have them fall within that safe harbor part where you wouldn't have your forgiveness reduced because of bringing them back again. So you're just extending that a period where you can now not have people come back and still have loan forgiven in the end. Basically, the common theme behind a lot of these changes is that it should make forgiveness, for the most part, a lot easier for everybody in the end, okay? There was a change to the term, and this is only actually effective for everybody that applied and received a loan after 6/5/2020. So if you received a loan after June 5th, 2020, your loan is actually on a 5-year term basis. If you applied for a loan and received a loan prior to that, you'll notice that all of your loan documents are actually, say, a 2-year term. Now, the lender has the ability for those folks who got a loan prior to June 5th to offer a 5-year window as well. Chances are we will likely work with you guys from a borrowing perspective if you end up with any sort of part of your loan not forgiven, working on what's going to be a reasonable repayment schedule for you. But just be mindful of that. If you got your loan prior to 6/5/2020, you're in a 2-year loan. If you got it after 6/5, you're in a 5-year loan. If you end up with a remaining balance and you do have that 2-year loan, we will absolutely discuss and work with you guys to figure out if there's a better path forward for your business to pay off whatever remaining balance, if there is that. But that's something I think that we'll talk about more once you actually are notified of a part of your loan not being forgiven. So that's part of our workout scenario in that case, okay? Deferred principal and interest payments. So everybody had initially been notified that their first payment, so if you applied with that first wave, your first payment would have been, I think, the beginning of October. That would have been 6 months from when you had applied. They actually extended that out to 10 months. So if you applied in April, for the most part now, your loan isn't going to have any sort of payment due until basically 2021. And so on and so forth. They extended that period where you don't have any deferred or you don't have any payment due out to 10 weeks. If you've also submitted the forgiveness paperwork and that 10 weeks lapse, 10 months lapses, you still don't have to make a payment. Basically, your payments won't start until you submit the forgiveness paperwork and work through it. If you're working through it, the payments will continue to not start until the lender and you come up with a final agreed upon forgiven amount, okay? Now, obviously, if you don't apply for forgiveness and that 10 months goes up, then your loan will come due at that point because you haven't processed the forgiveness of it, okay? But they've extended that now from 6 months to 10 months. So you've got some more time where you really don't have to worry about any sort of payment or anything like that, okay? And the deadline, the initial application deadline for the forgiveness part was October 31st, 2020. Would ruin your Halloween, right? That's now going to ruin your Christmas, I guess. No, that's now been extended to the end of the year. So the forgiveness deadline is December 31st, 2020. Okay, so you've got more time to get that forgiveness stuff. So again, there's no rush in getting the forgiveness part out. The only rush would be if you're positive, I guess, that the SBA is going to pay off most of it and you don't want interest to accrue in the time frame, during that time period, I guess maybe there would be a need to want to submit it earlier rather than later. But outside that, you don't have any sort of payment essentially due at all in 2020 for most everybody. So there shouldn't be a rush to have to request the forgiveness if waiting might be more advantageous for you guys. Okay. All right. Next screen on to these are from 6.5 exceptions. So added additional safe harbor exceptions. And I'm actually going to pull up the other PowerPoint that I had. That is not it. Where'd you go? Behind there. Okay.
While Shane gets his PowerPoint real quick, I just want to remind everyone about the questions in the chat. I'll just put a nice, for those that came in a little late, as you have questions in some of Shane's PowerPoints, again, we'll answer them at the end, but I just sent another chat just so everyone can see that. So just a heads up, Shane, you can keep going.
Cool, thanks, Mark. So that safe harbor rule, right? So basically think of the safe harbor rule as the exceptions that are out there for how your forgiveness will not be reduced on you for things that are outside of your control. Okay, so they did a pretty good expansion of that, one in which continues to remove the problem areas like people not coming back to work, you being shut down and not able to open up and how that impacts things. So basically the expansion of that, again, continues to make it so that more and more likely is it that you're going to get full forgiveness. And hopefully you guys can all see this, but the major changes are, again, if the person is voluntarily resigns, right, that does not affect your forgiveness. If you cannot find somebody at a similar position, you had to let somebody go, that type of thing, and you can't replace them with a similarly qualified individual because of what's going on, you can attest to that, and that won't reduce your forgiveness. If they refuse to come back after you offer that, their job back, I think I covered this last time, right? Get that offer letter in writing and get their lack of coming back in writing from them as well. And as long as you track that, their lack of coming back will not reduce forgiveness. So essentially what they do is they remove that person from the full-time equivalent headcount that we went over last time, okay? If you are shut down, this is one of the new ones as well. So if you literally can't open, and I'm going to use, maybe this changed, but gyms, right, in some areas of the country can't open up. If that's the case, and that's the reason why you couldn't use the proceeds on payroll, right? They're saying that then that's okay, as long as it's mandated by the governor, by the federal government, whoever that happens to be, that the business can't operate, then you won't have your forgiveness reduced because of something that is outside of your control, okay? So if you're one of those businesses, gyms, restaurants, those type that had that scenario, right, that would likely help keep your forgiveness completely intact for you as well, okay? So those are the kind of the main safe harbor changes that affect that full-time equivalent headcount formula that we went through in that last presentation on the 5th. Okay, so we'll get rid of that. Open this guy back up, figure out where we left off. Yeah, okay. All right, and then there was one exception, and this is probably something that you want to cover with your accountant. But essentially, the CARES Act previously restricted you as a business from being able to defer payroll tax payments. That has now changed, so that no longer is a restriction that would reduce your forgiveness or reduce that from a tax standpoint for your payroll. Okay, so that's definitely something if you have an accountant, your ADP, those type of people, they should know that at this point and be able to help you with any adjustments that you need to make. Okay. There were some other legislation that was passed later on as well. So on 6/30/2020, as I alluded to before, they extended the PPP program. So most of you probably have a PPP loan at this point. You can't reapply as of today for a second one. But if you know anybody that has gotten one, there's still time to submit and get approved for a PPP loan. So certainly, if you know anybody that's out there that hasn't gotten one, they can still apply. Okay. And then For those of you that did see the forgiveness application that was rolled out and that we showed in the presentation, they also updated what's called an easy forgiveness application. That form of the application is meant for sole proprietors and people who don't have employees, so your independent contractors. All it really does, so I don't know how easy this really is it removes 3 lines that you had to fill out if you had employees. So it's really not that much shorter of an application, but it does shorten it a bit. There is a little less work to that application than there is on the other one. So if you're an individual who does not have employees, you can take a look at that easy application. That one might be a little quicker for you to fill out in the end. Okay. Oop, too far ahead. All right. So I'm changing gears for a second. Again, just cover a lot of the changes to the PPP program. This is in regards to the EIDL program again. So that's the loan that you would have either applied for to get that $10,000 or up to $10,000 advance, or I think this one was up to $2 million. So basically, this is that program that was initially out there, and then people applied for it, and then you didn't hear anything for like 2.5 months. You can use basically the proceeds of this loan for any sort of debt restructuring. You could use it for working capital. There's a lot more that this can be used for than the PPP program. However, this program is not a forgivable loan. So it's up to $2 million, which you could use for those. It's directly through the SBA as well. I have a link on the end of the PowerPoint presentation that would bring you to that site. So we'll share that as well with you guys. But you would apply directly through the SBA. They process the loan. You end up paying them directly. There's no lender that's involved, period. It's a 3.75% fixed interest rate. I think if you are a nonprofit, it's actually a lower interest rate than that as well. I think it's a 0.5 point lower or something like that. But it's a fixed interest rate, and you can get the term for out to 3 years. Not everybody would get a 30-year term, from my understanding. It's dependent upon their business's ability to repay that loan, but you can, in certain scenarios, extend that loan out to 30 years. There's no loan payment due for 1 whole year after the date of funding. So you've got essentially a loan without any sort of loan payment for an entire year. So that'll help you get through whatever impact likely COVID's going to have before having to make any sort of payment. Again, I mentioned the use of the proceeds is different. It doesn't have to be used for payroll. You know, there's not any of those limitations that the PPP program has. You can use it for debt restructure, for other financial and financing needs, operating expenses, your normal working capital stuff, all of those traditional kind of commercial lending needs. You'd be able to use that loan for, unlike the PPP loan, which is very specific to payroll and those other qualifying costs. Okay. You should know the PPP loan, right, didn't require owners to guarantee the loan, did not require you to collateralize the loan in any capacity. The EIDL loan does. They will look personal guarantees if you own more than 20% of the company, and they will look for at least a UCC filing on all business assets as collateral. They will likely look for other collateral outside of that as well. But at minimum, they will still file a UCC lien on the business. So there is a security, or there is collateral that's involved in that aspect. Okay. Again, there's no forgiveness on this. It is a straight loan directly from the SBA. There's not a part of this that in any capacity that will get forgiven. I guess the only real part that didn't have to get repaid is if you receive that EIDL advance or that EIDL grant of up to $10,000, you didn't apply for a PPP loan, and you didn't end up getting the SBA EIDL funded, then that $10 is just free money for you at that point. But basically, if you, outside of that, if you applied for the PPP loan, that could factor in the forgiveness there. And then the rest of the EIDL loan is not a forgivable loan. Okay. Total turnaround time, you know, the PPP loans, those are about 4 or 5 days for lenders. You're looking at a 3 to 4 week process for the EIDL loan. They are going to look for financial information. It is going to be your more traditional commercial loan process in the end. Okay. And again, you still can technically request that EIDL advance. Again, just note though that if you request that and you've gotten a PPP loan, they're going to take part of that away from your PPP forgiveness. So in the case, and this is where I'm getting some requests now and some concerns from some people, you know, if you're an individual sole proprietor, right, and the max loan amount that you could have gotten at your $100,000 cap was basically a $20,000 PPP loan, and you got a $10,000 EIDL loan on top of that, basically half of your loan is not going to be forgiven on you. So just be very careful. Just know that if you pursue that EIDL advanced loan and you have gotten a PPP loan, that is in advance of that, and that will impact your forgiveness. Okay, so just a housekeeping item there to help avoid running into a scenario where you didn't realize. Okay, so that's the meat and potatoes of the application of what we're going to cover today, and then we'll get into questions. But a couple helpful links for you guys. And again, Corey, can we make sure that this presentation also gets updated on the website as well with the other one?
Yep, we'll have that.
Application. Say it again, Corey.
I said, yep, we'll have that uploaded after this.
The forgiveness application instructions, so that is on here. So you can use that hyperlink and the next two under that to actually access the SBA files themselves if you want to print that out. Again, I highly suggest you know how to get the information. I don't think that you need to necessarily have it all filled out now until we have a more formalized and then finalized process from the SBA. Okay. There is a calculator in here, and you're going to see the lovely little asterisk next to the calculator that says that we don't endorse any calculator because things continue to change. Okay, so as of I think it was, I want to say the 20th or something like that, 6/20, when I had seen this calculator. It might have even been a little bit later than that. It seemed like this is the most up-to-date calculator that there was there, that was out there, and it covers just about everything that we covered today. However, things can change and will continue to change, and that might impact this. So I kept the link in here for one, the hope that the CPA that put the calculator together, they're going to update it for you along the way. And then two, again, just so you guys do have some sort of resource instead of having to sit there and try to go through the mental math. There are a bunch of calculators out there, some better than others. This is as close to one as I could find that looks like it is accurate to the day that it says it was accurate on there. Okay, so feel free to use that. Again, use it at your own risk, but you can certainly take a quick look at how your scenario as of today would go up for forgiveness. I've got a link to the EIDL application that goes straight to the SBA website and where you would apply for that EIDL loan or the EIDL advance. Okay, and then the updated forgiveness application. And I'm going to I won't pull it up. We'll forget about that. Basically, again, if you guys were part of the 6-5 call that we did previously, I've updated that presentation with all of the stuff that we discussed today and how that impacted your forgiveness. So that should be an up-to-date version of the forgiveness process. So you should be able to take that PowerPoint, go through step by step, and complete the actual SBA forgiveness paper application utilizing that. Okay. All right. I think this is the last thing before we'll get into questions. Again, just kind of take note. I'd likely say the end of July, last week of July, first week of August, we will likely roll out that additional power or webinar at that point to cover the submission process, the website that will drive you guys to, and what that looks like. Once you submit forgiveness, just so you know, the lender essentially has up to 60 days to work through that process. I can't imagine that's going to take 60 days, you know, so long as we get the documents that we need to process it in the end. But it is going to be a slower turnaround process than you getting the origination aspect of the PPP loan, which was for most of you a week or two at most. It's probably going to be, you know, 2 or 3 weeks at minimum for us to review everything that we have coming in a timely manner. Okay, so sit tight. Again, make sure you can access the information that you need, but don't feel like you have to fill anything until we get that information out to you guys. Okay. So that completes the webinar part, and let's see how I did time. All right, that's longer than I thought it was going to be, but we are into the questions. So Corey, I don't know if you want to just start rolling down the questions that you have. I can certainly do them as well. I have them up to you.
Yes, I will. Before we do that, I'm gonna do some cleanup items. In the chat, I just put a link as well for our website in the chat. I'm also now putting in all of our social media handles with URLs as well as our Instagram. So again, as a reminder, all of this information will be available on all of our social media platforms, as well as, like Shane said, on our website directly after this. So if you're looking now, it's not there. Sorry. We have to finish it, have the video process, and then we can upload it. So there's questions in chat, I see. So again, thank you for those people that were sending those in. But we are going to get to our questions that were sent in first. So just because you put a question in the chat, we will get to it, I promise. But I have some questions that came through email before the webinar. So we're going to get to those first and then go to the Zoom chat. So first question was from Ben, and it was a three-parter, Shane, and I think you have these as well. The questions were, what do I need to ensure the entire PPP loan forgiveness? What is the what deadlines exist for the PPP loan forgiveness? And how will I know when the PPP loan amount is forgiven?
Okay. So again, the PPP loan proceeds is meant to be used for payroll and then those other qualifying costs, right? So as long as you use it for at least 60% of it for payroll, and the 40% for those qualifying costs, which are rent, interest on mortgages, and then those utilities that were in effect prior to 2/15/2020. As long as you also do not reduce your full-time headcount or people's salaries by more than 25%, you should get full forgiveness on your loans. Now, if you reduce, and it doesn't fall into the safe harbor stuff that we discussed before, right? So you opted to just not want to bring people back because you couldn't open or anything like that, right? That could reduce your forgiveness. Or if you reduce people's wages by more than 25%, that could reduce forgiveness as well. But as you don't do that and you use the money during the covered period, you should get full forgiveness. The deadlines for PPP, so again, the application deadline is now August 8th. The forgiveness application deadline, so applying for forgiveness, would be December 31st, 2020 now. And then you now have a 24-week period instead of the 8-week period to use those funds. So those are kind of the three large deadlines to keep in mind. The other, I guess, fourth one being if you have let people go and you want to bring them back and not have that forgiveness reduced, so again, furloughing them in that case example, you have to do that by 12/31/2020 as well, okay? And then how will I know when the PPP loan is forgiven? So you will actually submit a forgiveness request to us that will include the documentation supporting what you use the funds on in that forgiveness application. As I outlined, the lender has up to 60 days to approve or deny the forgiveness part. What we would do is we communicate out what we're saying you would be eligible for forgiveness. You would have the opportunity to supply some more information at that point to help substantiate full forgiveness or further forgiveness. We would go back at that point, take another look. So it's not going to be a one and done, right? You don't give us something, I just chop it off. You either gave me this and then you're stuck with it or you're done with it. No, there'll be a bit of a conversation back and forth if there's something that's tripping you up, and we'll work through those scenarios with you guys. But generally, we have up to 60 days after you submit that to make a decision on that forgiveness. If it's fully forgiven, then you shouldn't have to make a payment, you shouldn't have to do anything at that point. The SBA is just going to send us the money to basically pay off your loan in totality at that point. If there is a part that is not forgiven, then we would work on figuring out how to term that out into either the 2 to 5 year term basis so that it's paid in full, if that's the case.
All right, question. Yeah, question from Daniel. Has Nutmeg started accepting PPP loan forgiveness applications? If so, where do we go to submit an application for PPP loan forgiveness? And is there a particular website that will provide, which we will, but the first question, I guess, there.
Yeah, not as of yet. So again, sit tight. The SBA is still actually tying up what the lender has to do with what you provide us. So they've released at this point, for the most part, the documents, the process for the borrower and how they're going to apply for forgiveness. So that does exist, but they still haven't told us lenders what to do with it, how to submit it to them, how to ensure that they look at forgiving things. So that part still needs to be solved. That's what we're waiting on. Once they get that out to us, and again, I anticipate that in probably the next 2-3 weeks at most, to be honest, we will have our formal application process rolled out at that point. We will likely have a portal similar to what you did when you applied, that you would use as well to send all that stuff in securely to us. So more to come. We'll absolutely release that in communication, and we'll have, again, another webinar like this that will cover that process itself.
All right, I have a question from Jim, who looks like he did not make it, like he said he wasn't, but that's okay. We're still going to answer his question. Jim asks and states, I did not file for the PPP the first time around as my business was busy. Unfortunately, I've slowed down in the last 2 weeks of June and look to be quiet in July as well. The work is there or will come in, but their two biggest clients are on hold because of the work. So I filed the COVID PPU employment with the state. Not sure how it'll play out. I'm the owner and the only one working in the company. So the question after that story is the PPP something I can even apply to get in his scenario?
Yeah, so you can absolutely, Jim, apply for a PPP loan. However, if you get it, you no longer qualify for unemployment. So what I would suggest, because you've still got time for the PPP loan, is take a look at what the difference between what you would get from a PPP loan and then what you get for unemployment. And I say that because in a lot of scenarios like you, for self-employed people, you're actually going to get more money through unemployment that has a lot less stipulations to how you, basically there's no stipulations, you just get the money and it's your money at that point. You do whatever you want with it, right? If you take a PPP loan out, you would qualify, but you still have to go through that process of spending it in the appropriate manner to get that forgiveness part. Right. So I would say definitely it costs making sure that you don't get unemployment first and then apply for a PPP loan. Unemployment, from what I understand, has been backed up, and it's not abnormal for them to take a little while to get back to you. The way that it works is generally they will backdate your unemployment from whenever you applied, right? So you might get a huge lump sum, as your first money to it. But again, you're going to have a lot less stipulations, and in a lot of scenarios, you end up actually making more money on unemployment. So definitely continue to take a look at that as an option. If you get denied for it, though, absolutely, you should be able to apply for a PPP loan, or you're one of the businesses that would qualify.
All right, next question I have from Harry Meyer, who I saw here. There, yep, he's in this call. So, how will an employee's voluntary resignation after July 1st, 2020 affect the borrower's ability to certify on Form 3508Z that did not reduce the number of employees between January 1st and the end of covered period?
So that would fall into the safe harbor rule, right? So if the individual voluntarily resigns, they are basically now excluded from your full-time equivalent headcount. So you would just remove them from that equation.
And this is the last pre-sent question, and then I promise we'll get to the questions in the chat. So Matt St. George sent us in a question, two questions actually, and it looks like he's on the call here as well. So first question from Matt, can I transfer the entire amount as back pay all at once? If not, what is the best method to use the funds as quickly as possible and begin the forgiveness process? And then I know we already answered this, but I'm going to ask it since he didn't ask it. Where do I get the forgiveness application and how soon can I apply for? I know you just talked about that, but we'll answer it again.
So again, the forgiveness application, you can get right at the end of that PowerPoint that I just had. Certainly you can Google SBA forgiveness application. It'll come up as a part of that. I'm highly confident when we actually formalize the process, we'll include some sort of link or embedded document as well. So you'll be able to easily get it from there. So, certainly it's readily available. Again, sit tight. We're not accepting the actual applications as of yet. But you can certainly load it and start that process if you want to start the paperwork. Now, as far as the question in regards to how to use the funds, that's very specific to the type of business you are. And I'm not going to get into his specific case, but I'll give you the two different examples that most people will fall into. If you're a self-employed individual, you're the owner, and you used your 2019 Schedule C, As far as it looks right now, basically all the SBA is going to do is carry over that 2019 Schedule C and use that as your owner compensation validation for your PPP loan. So you probably won't have to provide significant records even showing that you paid yourself through it. Now, I think it's probably good to just back yourself up and create some sort of record of paying yourself throughout that process. And it doesn't have to be weekly. It just has to be during the covered period. You can do it all at once. You can do it in stages on a weekly basis. You can break it up however you want in that aspect. If you are an employee, the same thing goes with that. You have the ability to, well, let me rephrase that, a little bit different. You have the ability to choose 2 different periods to basically pay them, right? So you can start the day that you receive the loan proceeds. That would be your 8 or 24 week covered period starting that date. Or if you're one of those businesses that's on a bi-weekly pay schedule or monthly pay schedule, you can opt to wait until the next pay period syncs. You could start that 8 or 24 week period at that point. And you just have to make sure that you pay them somehow during that covered period. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a weekly basis. You can do it on a bi-weekly basis. You can do it once a month. You can feasibly bring somebody back at the last moment and pay them all in one line, giant lump sum, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Just make sure it's during that covered period. That's the important part.
All right, so that's it for the pre-sent questions. Now I'm going to be getting to the Zoom questions. So the first one I hear here is from Jillian. Question is, can we fill out the EZ form if we had employees but did not reduce any FTEs?
Good question. I haven't seen guidance on that yet. My thought is you still have to go through the FTE calculation of some sort. So I don't think so. The way that I've seen the easy application is to say it's for people without employees. So as of right now, I would say you probably have to fill out the larger one. But again, it's like 3 lines longer, so it's not a ton. Good question though, Jill. To be honest, that might change, but as of today, I would say you're on the longer form, unfortunately.
Another FTE question here from Susan. When I filed for PPP, I started, I had 10 FTEs. Now, when I reduce the PPP report, when I reference the PPP reports on ADP, they say I only have 7 FTEs. Which number do I use?
So according to the guidance, you have the ability to look at 2 different periods, and I'm jogging my memory as to what they are. One's Q1 2020, or I think you can average out basically what your full-time equivalent headcount in 2019 was. I think you could do either or. You can opt for whatever one sets you up better for forgiveness. What the important part is to be consistent on how you calculate who's full-time employee and how you get to that number, right? So if you remember from the last presentation, we went over 2 different methods. You could use a simplified method, which is basically if you're part-time, you're worth a half a body, and if you work full-time, you're worth a full body, right? Or you can do it in tenths. So if you work 20 hours, right, that's still a half for 40, but if you work 10 hours, that'd be 0.25. You can round down to the 10th in those cases. So you can look at either one of those and use either one of them to the way that I understand it now. Now, it almost sounds like in your case, Susan, though, it might be more about how ADP calculated the full-time equivalent headcount initially, and it's not that something changed on your end, it's in how they calculated it. And I would say in a scenario like that, as long as you could substantiate the difference in what you applied with versus what it actually was during that period, and that will be enough to get it forgiven, right? So you might have to show us why in a case when you applied it said 10 and now it's only 7, but as long as you could substantiate that, I'm sure you're okay.
All right, next question is still from Susan, so it's almost a follow-up. All of her employees are hourly. However, because we were closed, I issued monies to them in a lump sum amount. How do I relate this to the 75% reduction stipulation?
So it's a 75%, you don't reduce it on an annualized basis. So you essentially wanted to figure out what their salary would be on that annualized basis up to $100,000, because again, they capped it at that $100,000 mark, and make sure that that lump sum that you gave them equates out to no less than 75% of what it would be on an annualized basis.
Okay.
Susan,
Question here.
that calculator that's on there, there's a box or two that's in there that would be very helpful, I think, in running through that scenario.
Question from Mark. So self-employed with no employees can get the loan and have it forgiven?
Yeah, so they're going to use, Mark, essentially they used your net earnings for 2019. So individuals like you either had to buy your Schedule C or a K1 if you were in a partnership scenario. And your allocated portions of your net earnings for the business essentially became your annual compensation. So in the case of a Schedule C, that's line 31 of your Schedule C, your net profit, your net income. As an individual employee, that essentially is your 2019 annual payroll. So you would have gotten your PPP loan based off of that being your annual payroll. And the forgiveness part would also look at that for you.
Question from Robert. I am a C Corp and my business is part-time. Therefore, my employees are all part-time, including me, the owner. How will this work in the PPP forgiveness loan?
So again, if you're not changing, if you didn't change them from time to part-time, you're not going to have a problem with the FTE scenario, because that should equate out from one to the other. It doesn't sound like you have a reduction in their salary, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. You would have gotten your PPP loan proceeds in the same manner that you would need to spend it. None of their hours didn't change. So as long as you didn't change any of that stuff, your forgiveness should be fine, I would think, if I'm understanding that question correctly. The part-time status really shouldn't impact you much.
All right, that is the last question I saw in the chat. We'll give it a couple minute or two here. If anyone has any other follow-up questions, you can use it in the chat. I will remind everyone a couple things while we wait for that. I'm gonna do it again because I typed it once. There are our four social media handles: Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. There's a links, and our Instagram in case you need to follow it. This video will be posted there, later tonight, probably within the hour after we finish here. Shane, do you have that PowerPoint you just used as in a PDF form by chance?
Yeah, I can get it too. Yeah.
Because there's actually, we can attach it right here to the chat. That's why I ask. Or you can just dump the PowerPoint file in. So these guys that attended get a little special treat. They can actually get it without going to the website if they want it a little early. So in the chat, there's a file option if you want to attach it for them. PDF is probably easier, going to be honest with you, if you want to format it quickly. Oh, there we go. Oh, too late. They're too bad. You guys are getting the PowerPoint. It's in the chat. If you don't want that, like I said,
I uploaded the presentation from 6.5. That's the updated one, and then the presentation from today. So there's both of those.
Yep. So they're in the chat for you guys. You guys are special gift for attending and sitting through 54 minutes of me and Shane John back and forth at each other. So it looks like Susan added another question in the chat though before we go. How does it work if I hire different employees because a couple of my old employees did not return?
So based off of the safe harbor change, it actually wouldn't matter. Initially, it would have been fine because they would wash themselves out, right? That bringing somebody back would help keep your full-time headcount up. But the recent change with the safe harbor part, where they basically said if somebody leaves, that takes them out, of the equation in that case. So as long as it follows that that safe harbor part that I brought up earlier, that's in the other presentation, then it wouldn't matter for you.
That was Susan. Jean has one here. Is there a specific form to fill out when forgiveness time is done, and how do we get it?
So that's one of the links on the presentation I just did today. So if you look on page 6, there's the full forgiveness application, and then there's the easy application link and the instructions on there as well.
Awesome. What I'm going to try to do is pull it up and put the chat in the link there. All right, that's there. You guys have both of these PowerPoints in the chat. I'll leave the webinar open here for a couple more minutes in case anyone else has any questions. But I will say thank you, Shane, again, for giving us this good information. I know it's been helpful for a lot of the people. I see a lot of returning webinar people in here. So a couple of reminders, we will be doing another one to follow up what Shane was just talking about in regards to forgiveness. At the end of the month, we don't have a date or a week quite yet, but expect it at the end of July and the beginning of August. When we do have a date, it will be released on our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can download these 2 PowerPoints that Shane went over the last 2 weeks here in the chat. If we close out before you have able to download it, that's fine. We'll have these PowerPoint listed on our website shortly after the video is ending here, as well as replay of this video. So if you want to go back to reference anything that Shane said, or you know someone that would benefit from it, please share and like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, like us on Instagram. That's my marketing side of me kind of coming out there. So other than that, Shane, thank you. It looks like we're all done with questions. Tim, thank you for thanking us. I see in the chat. And enjoy your Friday, Saturday, and Sunday coming up, and have a nice rest of the night. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.